The ground trembles beneath the march of the legions. The sun falls on golden shields and aligned spears. The Roman standards wave silently, and among the soldiers, a distinct figure walks in formation. It is not a man. It is not a horse. It is a dog, but not just any dog. It is a creature of war, huge, muscular, with dark fur, a wide snout, and eyes that do not blink. It wears armor, it has fangs, and it does not bark because it doesn't need to intimidate with sound. Its mere presence speaks volumes. It is trained to kill. Its name was feared, respected, and over time, forgotten. Canis Pugnax, the war dog of the Roman Empire. A four-legged soldier that marched, watched, fought, and died beside men. A gladiator in the arenas, a guard in the legions, an executioner in punishments. An animal whose story was erased from many books, but not from the memory of true history, because Rome did not only dominate the world with human armies, but also with creatures like him, disciplined, wild and loyal until the last breath. Stay with me, because today you will discover a story that Rome did not write in its columns, nor sing in its poems, but still breathes under the dust of its battlefields. This is the story of Canis Pugnax. Before Rome had armies, before it built its roads, its aqueducts and its empires, there was already a legendary dog that accompanied men in war, hunting, and protection. We are talking about the Greek molossian, one of the oldest and most powerful breeds in the ancient world. Originating from Epirus, a mountainous region in northern Greece, the molossian was used by shepherds to protect their flocks from wolves and bandits. But it was not a mere guard dog. It was huge, muscular, with a broad head and a jaw capable of crushing bones. A dog with the spirit of a warrior. The Greeks revered it. Philosophers, poets, and generals mentioned it with respect. Even Alexander the Great is said to have marched with Molossians alongside his army, considering them as valuable as his men. When Rome came into contact with this culture, as it always did, it not only copied their temples and gods, it also took their dogs, and thus the transformation began. Rome was not satisfied with the original Molossian. It crossed it with local breeds. It made it more obedient, more resilient, more functional for the empire's needs. Thus, Canis Pugnax was born, literally the combat dog, a new class of dog, robust, weighing between 45 kilos, with broad shoulders, a firm jaw, a deep chest, and a gaze that did not hesitate, with dark fur to blend with the night, with agile yet heavy steps, with a serene mind, until it heard an order. This dog was not just a useful animal, it was a symbol of the new Roman order. Total obedience, strength without remorse, absolute loyalty. And like the legionaries, it was willing to kill or die for Rome. Its creation was not accidental. It was a military, cultural, and political decision. The Canis Pugnax was not born as a pet. It was born as a weapon, and it was about to find its place both in the bloody games of the circus and in the dusty battlefields of the most powerful empire of antiquity. Rome was many things: the engineer of the world, the master of order, the relentless conqueror. But if there was one thing that characterized it, it was its ability to learn from others. At first, the use of dogs in war was not a central part of its military doctrine. Rome preferred its well-formed legions, its pillar of steel, its human discipline. But this vision began to change when its soldiers started clashing with cultures that already used dogs as war weapons. In the campaigns against the Gauls, the Celts, the Germans, and the Britons, the Romans faced not only savage warriors, but beasts trained to kill. Dogs that did not flee at the sight of a shield, that attacked without fear of spears, and that even when their masters fell, continued defending the fortresses as if they understood the cause. One documented case occurred during the wars against the Samnites. In the fort, the Romans reported that even after capturing villages, the dogs defended the remains of their masters with maddened fury. They had to kill each one before they could take the position. Later, during Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul and his incursion into Britain, the Romans would encounter this type of canine resistance again. This time in the form of huge dogs trained to attack formations and sow chaos among the infantry. It was here that something changed. Rome understood the tactical value of dogs in combat. If their enemies used these creatures effectively, why not perfect a formula under the Roman standard? Thus, the strategic decision was made to incorporate the Canis Pugnax into the military apparatus, not only as a deterrent or surveillance beast, but as an actual operational unit. For the first time, the dog was not just a symbol of protection or spectacle, it was an extension of the legion. And in the wars that would come, this decision would make the difference on more than one occasion. Roman soldiers lived in constant motion. They marched day and night, armed, loaded, crossing mountains, swamps, deserts, and enemy lands. But every time they stopped, they built a fortress. These temporary fortresses were called castra, and they were much more than a camp. They were the mobile home of the empire. Within those castra, the Canis Pugnax was not just an ornament. It was a vital survival tool. At night, while the legionaries slept with sweat still on their brows, these dogs patrolled the perimeter. They detected sounds, sniffed in the darkness, and alerted without barking, simply tensing their bodies or emitting a low growl. In many cases, they were the first to detect a spy or an assassin. But it wasn't enough to be fierce. The Canis Pugnax had to be disciplined, tactical, almost human. It learned to recognize the smells of the soldiers in its unit. It was trained to obey specific voice commands, ignore those without authority, and not attack diplomatic visitors, allied civilians, or new recruits. Furthermore, not all moments were of battle. During the daily marches, the Canis Pugnax accompanied the legionaries, trotting between the wagons, alert to the slightest change. When they arrived at the terrain and the soldiers began building the walls of the new castrum, the dogs guarded the exposed edges where there were no defenses yet, because that was the most dangerous time. The legionaries were tired, unarmed, digging, building structures. If an enemy attacked at that precise moment, the first to face the chaos were the dogs. And they never failed. They also guarded prisoners, prevented nighttime escapes, and if any managed to escape, it was the Canis Pugnax who tracked them through kilometers of forest. In this context, the dog became more than just a military tool. It became a brother, a sentry, an equal. It was not uncommon to see soldiers share their rations with the dog, nor was it uncommon for them to sleep curled up with the dog during the winter. And when they fell in battle, some dogs refused to leave their bodies. The loyalty of a legionary was famous, but the loyalty of the Canis Pugnax was absolute. The Colosseum, 50,000 voices thundered like thunder over the stone. There was no space for silence. There was no place for mercy under the scorching sun and the anxious gazes of senators, patricians, merchants, and slaves. The gates of hell opened, and from them, not a leon, not a gladiator, not a prisoner, a dog emerged, a Canis Pugnax, with thick jaws, pitch-black fur, fearless eyes, and muscles tense like a legionary's. No introduction was needed. The crowd already knew its name, because in the bloody spectacle, Rome, the Canis Pugnax was both star and execution. The games weren't just duels between men. Rome also demanded blood from animals. Tigers, bears, crocodiles, and yes, dogs. Fights were organized between them. They were thrown against bulls, against lions, or even against unarmed men, prisoners, deserters, slaves. The people wanted to see a spectacle, and the Canis Pugnax gave it to them. But it was not treated as just a beast. The best specimens were cared for like champions. They were fed with select meat. They were trained harshly but precisely. And their reputation could elevate it or ruin their owner's name. There were dogs so famous that the people chanted their names before each battle. And when they died in the arena, some would bid farewell with as much respect as a human gladiator. Their presence instilled fear, not just for their strength, but because they represented what Rome valued above all: obedience, brutality, and honor. They were also used in public executions. When a prisoner was sentenced to die by devouring, the Canis Pugnax were chosen if the execution was meant to be quick, precise, and terrifying. But the spectacle wasn't the only thing they did. These beasts, roaring under the applause of the Colosseum, also marched to war, because for Rome, what was useful and lethal could always serve a dual purpose. The official history rarely mentions the Canis Pugnax in battles, but it doesn't mean they weren't there. It means that, like many silent heroes, they did their duty without asking for remembrance. Still, there are traces, brief mentions, carved in stone, and monuments that reveal their presence with the same certainty as the smell of iron and blood in the air. During Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, it is documented that his troops faced dogs defending Gallic villages trained to fight to the death. That experience was so impactful that Caesar ordered the capture and breeding of some specimens to observe their behavior and assess their potential military use. On the northern frontier, the legions stationed in Britain, Germania, and Thrace were the most likely to use dogs in active combat roles. This was written by authors like Tacitus and Strabo, who recorded that these regions made extensive use of dogs in camps and also in sieges. A striking material testimony is the Columnus Odere in Marcus Aurelius, built around 19 Laceres. There, among the scenes of the emperor's battles in the Marcomannic Wars, figures of dogs can be seen fighting alongside the legionaries. They are not in the center. They do not have names, but they are there with their mouths open, leaping over enemies, within the visual narrative that Rome sculpted to remember its glory. Were they used as direct weapons, or only as guards and trackers? The truth is, there is no consensus, but the iconography, archaeological remains, and literary fragments point to a clear conclusion. The Canis Pugnax was part of the Roman war theater, perhaps not as the protagonist, but as a key piece in a machinery, where every gear, human or animal, counted. As trackers in the Germanic snow, as sentinels in the Syrian desert, as living defense in isolated fortresses in Britannia. The Canis Pugnax had no ranks, but they had a mission to defend Rome. Rome wrote its history in marble, bronze, and blood. Each emperor had his monuments, each battle its chronicle, each general his statue. But what about the dogs? Although they were guardians in the camps, stars in the arena, and sentinels during dangerous campaigns, the Canis Pugnax rarely appears as protagonist in classical text. Why? The reasons could be many, perhaps because for Roman chroniclers, almost always patricians, poets, or politicians, animals were not worthy of epics. Or maybe because the dog, despite its loyalty and usefulness, was still a tool, not a subject. In a culture that exalted the human above all else, dedicating pages to an animal, even if it was brave, was unthinkable for many writers of the elite. There is also another possibility: military pragmatism. Dogs played essential roles, watching, tracking, chasing, but their use was not massive or standardized, and so they simply remained on the margins of reports. Interestingly, the Greeks were more generous in this regard. Alexander the Great adored his dogs. His father, Philip II, had canine troops. And in Hellenistic literature, there are more mentions, more respect, more presence of these four-legged allies. In contrast, Rome preferred to sculpt human heroes. The Canis Pugnax remained trapped in that limbo where the nameless essentials dwell. It was there, it fought, it died, but it does not appear. Today, thanks to archaeology, engravings, genetic remains, and the few scattered stories, we can reconstruct its history. A history that doesn't shout but endures. Just as they did. The Canis Pugnax, as a breed no longer exists. It disappeared at some point in late antiquity, dissolved in wars, genetic mixes, and the progressive collapse of the empire. But its mark remains among us. Modern breeds like the Neapolitan Mastiff, Cane Corso, or even some variations of the Bordeaux dog or the Presa Canario retain physical and temperamental traits that remind us of that four-legged warrior who marched with the legions. Strength, they have it. Loyalty, impossible to measure. Courage, just watch how they react to a threat. But beyond genetics, the true legacy of the Canis Pugnax is symbolic. It represents the purest version of loyalty in times of war. The warrior who did not demand pay, the soldier who didn't need speeches to fight, the sentry who never slept, the companion who didn't abandon the wounded, not even under arrows or fire. In Rome, some of these dogs even had gravestones. Their names, few, were engraved in stone. Fidus, for example, appears on a tomb discovered near Pompeii. Here lies Fidus, who never left me alone. It's not a myth, it's history. Today, every time a dog guards your house, defends its family, or dies protecting, it channels an ancient echo. The echo of the Canis Pugnax, those who once walked beside emperors and died as part of the most powerful army of the ancient world. Over centuries, Romiforian empires, destroyed kingdoms, wrote the history of the world in stone, metal, and fire. But among all its conquests, there were figures who never claimed glory, but without whom the empire wouldn't have endured. One of them walked on four legs. It had no shield, no toga, no last name, but it had a heart that beat for its legion and fangs that did not hesitate when war called. The Canis Pugnax was more than a combat dog. It was a symbol of obedience, sacrifice, camaraderie, and total devotion. It lived among soldiers, died among battles, and still lives today in the genetic memory of breeds that protect homes and people without expecting a statue in return. And perhaps that's what we should remember most, that while marble honors forgotten emperors, the Canis Pugnax is still present in every act of canine loyalty, in every dog that stands between its human and danger, and in every untold story that history at last begins to reclaim. Did you know the story of the Canis Pugnax? Do you think these dogs should have a more visible place in the tales of the Roman Empire? Let me know in the comments. Share this video if you love hidden history and its silent heroes, and don't forget to subscribe to discover more stories that time almost buried me, but today, together we awaken once again.